Now, what I want to know, Johnny Polson. So you were, I don't know a lot about your triathlon days, but when you talk about it, you talk that you're one of the greats. So, because you were like, I raced for Australia and I did this. What I want to know is the person back then, is he different to the guy racing high rocks today?
No, but I understand him a lot more than I did back then. The person back then was full of anxiety, full of self-doubt, but would work his tits off, probably work harder than most people, like consistent, would overtrain a lot. And I see so many of the similarities that and things that I was doing back then that I do now. Anxiety would be probably the most profound one, and I've learned to kind of identify that myself versus back then it was kind of pre-race anxiety, kind of that I was the ultimate trainer, but a horrible racer most of the time.
Where does the self-doubt come from?
I don't know. I don't know if it ever actually comes from somewhere. Like I'm sure if I chatted to a shrink long enough, there would be some sort of cause back. But I think you're born with that killer instinct, or you're born with, not born with the killer instinct. And I probably never had that to some degree, especially from a triathlon elite athlete perspective. I used to train with, some of Australia's greatest triathletes, but I wasn't one of Australia's best triathletes, obviously. I only ever did it on a professional level, but I never earned a wage from it. But I could hold my own, not just in individual sessions, but week in, week out with these guys. I went on training camps to Europe with them. But then I would get to races, and a lot of the time I would be spat out at the back in the swim, or I'd be dropped on the bike holding wattage or at a pace in the swim that just I could keep up with. Ironically, when I retired, or the year that I retired, I had my best race for 70.3 world champs in Mont Tremblant. But by that stage, I was just so fucked. Mentally, I was fried, and I was ready to kind of do something else. So there wasn't any question. But yeah, I felt like I underachieved a lot.
Did you have a lot of support outside of the sport?
Yeah, I came from a pretty privileged upbringing. Like, not that I had everything, but I never went without, if that makes sense. Like, my dad was fairly successful, and then he lost it all. But then, my mum kind of then took over, and then she's become very successful. And they both, to their credit, just gave me every opportunity, even if it involved a lot of sacrifice from their side. So, potentially when I do look back to answer your last question, I look at a lot of the guys that I was training with, and that was the only thing that they had. It was that or bust, right? And I feel like when I look back at it, I always had something to fall back on, because that's what my parents always instilled in me, is that, like, hey, you've got to have a degree. And so I got 2 degrees, and I was always working at the same time I was competing. So when I was living in Boulder for 3 years, I was also working as well. So I think that probably had a bit to do with it, where I wasn't always fully committed. I always had probably a little bit of an excuse in the back of my head, and that may have pulled in some self-doubt from a competition perspective.
So if you take Johnny Polson today and you put him back then, what changes?
Oh, Jesus, that's a tough question, because you're also now gone through 10 years of owning a business, and that kind of rips you inside and out, right?
So everything that you learned from there, now you're starting a new sport in a sort of semi-pro or pro environment, and you've learned all that from business, and you go back and you become Johnny Polson then. Is he a different athlete? Is he a better athlete? Does he succeed?
You know what? Sitting in here now, probably, Jesus, it's close to not 20 years, but it's getting closer to 20 years post that time. I would probably say, fuck it, go all in, right? And that's knowing that, hey, you're 20, you've got the ability to turn yourself around and start a new career 3 times over, right? The worst thing that you can do in life is just hold on and just beat a dead horse.
So what does that look like? Fuck it, go all in. What does that actually? What do you mean?
Be prepared to risk it. So for those people that, you know, for those young athletes that are also, and I see it quite a lot, that they're the busiest people. They've got to go straight from training to uni. Like, I think it's important to have something else, have another interest, but not to the degree where it's becoming an excuse for you. It should be a hobby, a creative outlet, that sort of thing, right? It should never be an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And if it does get to a level as an excuse, then it means that you're not all in. You're not fully committed. You're not prepared to risk it all. You're not prepared to, when it gets really fucking hard, 3 hours into the race, and this race could mean a new sponsorship. It could mean 10 grand for you. That could completely change your life. Whatever the prize money is now, if you've got that ability now, well, then or now, to go, hey, this is going to change my life, and it's the only thing that is going to change my life, that just puts you on another zone versus, oh, it doesn't really matter. You know, if it doesn't work out, I'll probably work out next race, or I've got physio, or insert whatever other career that you're doing. So I think it's just differentiating, is that other thing in your life a distraction, an excuse for you? And if it is, then get rid of it until such time as you can fully commit to it, because you're probably not giving that thing credit either. Right?
It sounds like, though, that the whole self-doubt thing for me is the big bit to your puzzle.
Yeah.
Like, if you're keeping up with them running, look, swimming out the back, and I never did your sort of level, but I trained with Marinda Carfrae, and I saw what she went through, as in she was the same. Terrible swimmer, amazing bike, crazy runner, did all the Olympic distance, just was always out the back, you know, couldn't get into the Olympic team, but then went to that full distance, and obviously, you know, the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah, self-doubt is the biggest thing in my life. It is right now. It has been through the last 10 years of Black Sheep. And you if you look at some of the most successful entrepreneurs, it's not that they're, you know, completely just throw caution into the wind, but they've got that element of just risking it, right? And I've always, you know, I've risked it to an extent. I'll give myself credit. Like, you don't build a business off nothing to not risk it. But when you get to a point where it has become your career, you're employing people, I've got a heart, I've got a soul, that's where self-doubt can really be detrimental to scaling a business, taking opportunity. And it's probably been the number one thing that's stood in the way of Black Sheep, to be perfectly honest, as well.
I'd love to know where it comes from, though. It's like a corner pillar of your life.
Yeah, I also think it has its strengths, to be perfectly honest. And I think it's just now understanding, okay, it's impeding some things in your life, but it's also making you that guy that people trust, people see as authentic.
Do you think it turned you into an overthinker?
No, I don't necessarily overthink things. I think there's a very real difference between self-doubt and overthinking stuff. I am more prepared, and one of my greatest strengths has been to be able to basically push out, whether it's product collection campaigns, where, you know, I've got a very high bar of what I believe is acceptable or not, but I'm never going to leave something on the table, right? I always want to get stuff out to market. And if I was an overthinker, then I would just get trapped in that vortex, right? And that's one of the things that I felt like I've been able to really communicate to staff, is like, be prepared to learn on iteration, that next time you'll get better. Don't try and make that first thing perfect. And you hear a lot of people say that, right? So I think I'm good at not necessarily overthinking stuff, but the self-doubt is definitely, and I'm not sure how you know, I'm sure I could come up with different situations but I definitely see both as being very different.
Did you have that as a kid growing up?
Self-doubt?
Yeah, 10, 12-year-old Johnny?
No, I didn't. There was probably a few things that I guess that a few inflection points that happened through my life that probably increasingly created a self-doubt / anxiety. I can remember myself as a kid at school that would love going up on stage, love doing public speaking, would just froth on it. You know, I wasn't necessarily an extrovert or like the most popular kid at school, but I would definitely put my hand up to do that sort of stuff. And distinctly remember that feeling of like, hey, this is something I'm really good at. That's something I enjoy. And
so where did it click? Where did it just
I don't.
change?
There wasn't one point, but like if you go back, reversing my life, there were points when, let's say, and I'll just go from more recent to now. You know, like there was a business breakup that I had. You know, after year one of Black Sheep, I started Black Sheep with a really good friend of mine, and then that completely went to shit. And then lawyers got involved, and the amount of stress and anxiety, like it just visceral, just like, just your stomach and insides just churning like 24/7 for months on end. And I just remember, and I was speaking to Kelly at the time, like, this is causing long-term detrimental impacts to my personality. Like there's no way that it can't, because it's just overtaking me. So there's that sort of stuff, and there's probably been one or two points through Black Sheep that's happened. And then you reverse, you go like triathlon, that's probably a little bit more slower course, but like when you think of like the time that you spend by yourself and and like all elite sports, the amount of times that you have failure. The best athletes fail more. Like what was the Roger Federer statistic of like 55% that he failed, or whatever it was, of matches that he lost. And the greatest tennis player of all time. So like naturally as a sportsman, like you fail more than you succeed, and that for someone with self-doubt just slowly rips you. Like it could be on a session by session basis, even a rep on rep basis, right? Like if you don't nail 400, then that can turn yourself in. So like I think that was more slower burn. I remember early days in triathlon, I had to get pulled from the water in a race because I had an anxiety attack.
Been there, done that. Did you actually, in the middle of the whole triathlon era, did you honestly think you could make a living out of it and you were going to be one of the best triathletes?
I was really close. To this day.
Did you believe it though?
Yeah, and that probably caused a little bit of the self-doubt now as well, because I think the conversation that happens in your head is that, how long do I keep doing this for? How long do I hold on to this dream?
How long do I earn $5?
Yeah, or nothing, really. And be a burden to my family, to my parents, and then to a lesser extent, later down the line to your wife. And that's a big burden and a big responsibility to carry. And I distinctly remember that, like, it was constantly fighting this, I'm so close, but like people were sacrificing so much, and that's not an unusual story, but that again is one of those points where self-doubt really pops its head up, because what's the reverse of that, right? Of like just complete confidence.
Well, that's why I was trying to understand. So you honestly think you could make it? Now, I only think of this because I, in a reverse life, did acting for 3 years and I was fucking great at it. Did theatre and everything, gave up accounting, had a degree, and I did theatre. I was trying to get into Neighbours and all that sort of shit, but I didn't have my parents supporting me.
You would have been great on Neighbours.
Yeah, fantastic. Would have been better in Hollywood. What I'm trying to get at with you is, because I feel like, did you honestly have that support from family going, you're going to make it, you're amazing, we support you, I don't care that you're earning $2, financially we'll push you, because I feel like that's what the successful people seem to have.
I think so. Like, I would never say that I didn't. I think a lot of this, potentially the counter to that would be in my mind, right? So like one thing that I've worked on with psychologists is moments where, like, when I was at home living with my mum, I distinctly remember situations where like she'd come home and like she's like, "What have you done all day?" Right? Well, I've just been training for like 10 hours, but and I don't think necessarily, she was saying anything wrong. It was more like another one of those moments of like self-doubt of like, am I actually good enough? Like, why am I actually doing this?
She could have said it a lot better and I guess supported you a bit more.
Yeah. So, but she was the one ultimately supporting me financially, right? So it's I would never sit there that she was anything but, you know, my greatest supporter. And again, I think it's more how I was framing that in my mind. Yes, she could have said it better. But again, like, what do you expect from a parent, especially from a parent that wasn't an athlete, that wasn't an elite athlete, that was never in that position that knew what they needed? And individual sports are, you know, it's not a team sport. It's, you know, it is all on your shoulders. You are the maker of, you know, your own destiny. You know, you don't have a team to pick you up, right? So ultimately, if I was perhaps a different personality that would go, you know what, fuck yeah, I've done a lot today. You know, I've trained 10 hours a day. What have you done? Right? not that, but it's like being confident enough to stand up and go, you know what, I've done a lot. So yeah, like that is definitely a distinct memory and something that I've worked through. But again, I just think it's a byproduct of so many different things that have slowly like created this self-doubt.
So Johnny today goes back. Does he make it?
Yeah, I think so. I think so by changing that one thing of ensuring that it is okay to have another focus, but it's more important to basically define what is that focus in that certain period. And that is something that I do a lot better now. Like I employ a method called Top 5 at the moment, where I go through each of my day, every single one of my days, and map out like what are my 5 key tasks. And ensuring that they align with like greater goals for myself and the business, whether it's that month, that quarter, that year. They all kind of have a flow-on effect. And look, it can be anything, but as long as it's justifying to myself what is important and what's not.
Last question, Johnny. So one of your daughters wants to become a triathlete pro. What are you different as a parent? Do you give her a go for it?
Yeah, I think so. Like
in the back of your mind, though, you know she's not good enough.
Look, I'd hope that they find their own way. Yeah, I think, again, like you can't be rational really when it comes to this. Like there's probably avenues that would pop up in that journey for her that might not be down that professional triathlon journey, right? And I don't want to get in the way of that. And I'm confident enough that there'll be smart kids, there'll be talented kids that they'll be able to do that. Legendary season, they gon' feel me breathing. I've been working heavy, you too busy sleeping.